There are moments in life that divide time into two parts: before and after. Before the phone call, before the diagnosis, before the goodbye, before the relationship ended, before the person who had always been there suddenly wasn't. And afterward, the world may look almost exactly the same. People go to work, traffic moves, stores open, messages arrive, the sun rises. But something inside you knows that the world you were living in no longer exists. That is one of the strange realities of grief. Loss doesn't simply remove someone or something from our lives. It can change the life that remains. And that is where our exploration begins. Welcome to the psychology of grief. Not an attempt to tell anyone how they should grieve. Not a timetable for getting over loss. And certainly not a promise that pain can be neatly packaged into a few predictable stages. Instead, we are going to explore something much more human: why grief affects us so deeply, why it can change the way we think, feel, remember, sleep, relate to other people, and even understand ourselves, and perhaps most importantly, why healing does not require forgetting what mattered. Grief is more than sadness. When people hear the word grief, sadness is usually the first emotion that comes to mind. But grief is much larger than sadness. It can contain anger, confusion, fear, relief, guilt, numbness, longing, disbelief, sometimes even laughter, and occasionally several of these emotions can appear within the same hour. Psychologists understand grief as a response to significant loss, and that response can involve emotional, cognitive, physical, behavioral, and social changes. This is why grief can sometimes feel so disorienting. A person may expect to feel sad. They may not expect to forget why they walked into a room. They may not expect ordinary decisions to suddenly feel exhausting. They may not expect sleep to become difficult. They may not expect certain smells, songs, or places to trigger powerful memories. Without warning, they may not expect moments of calm to be followed by guilt, and they may not expect to feel perfectly functional one afternoon and devastated the next morning. But grief does not operate according to a neat emotional schedule. It affects an entire human being. The mind has something difficult to learn. There is another reason loss can feel almost impossible to understand at first. Our relationships do not exist only in the present moment. They also exist inside our expectations. Imagine someone you have known for decades. Without consciously thinking about it, your brain has built thousands of assumptions around that person. You expect their voice, their habits, their reactions, their presence at certain occasions. Perhaps you know where they usually sit. You know how they answer the telephone. You know what they would say about certain people. You may see something interesting and automatically think, I have to tell them about this. Then reality interrupts that expectation. You remember, you cannot tell them. That tiny moment can contain enormous pain. Researchers studying the neuroscience of grief have proposed that part of grieving involves the brain gradually learning a reality that conflicts with deeply established attachment and autobiographical knowledge. Intellectually, a person may know that someone is gone, but the systems of expectation developed over years of attachment may take much longer to adjust. That helps explain something many grieving people experience. For a split second, you forget. You expect the door to open. You think you saw them across the street. You reach for the phone, and then the loss happens again. Not because you failed to understand what happened, but because relationships leave patterns inside us. We don't only lose a person. This brings us to something even deeper. When someone important disappears from our lives, we rarely lose only that individual. We may also lose routines, roles, plans, traditions, security, companionship. A shared history, a future we assumed would happen, perhaps even part of our identity. A woman who loses her husband after 50 years of marriage does not experience only the absence of one person. She may also confront questions she has not faced in half a century. Who am I now? How do I spend the evenings? Who do I tell the small things to? Who understands the stories nobody else remembers? A person leaving a long marriage may experience something similar, even when the separation was necessary. A person retiring after 40 years may grieve a role that once gave structure to every weekday. Someone whose health changes may grieve freedom, independence, or abilities they once took for granted. Someone whose adult child becomes estranged may grieve a relationship with someone who is still alive, and someone whose dream never happened may grieve a future that existed only in imagination. This is why grief cannot be understood only as bereavement after death. Human beings can grieve whenever something meaningful becomes permanently or profoundly different. The details change. The emotional reality of loss remains. Why other people sometimes don't understand. One of the loneliest parts of grief can arrive after the initial crisis has passed. At first, people may call, they visit, they send messages, they ask how you're doing. Then gradually, ordinary life resumes for them, but perhaps not for you. This can create an uncomfortable mismatch. Other people may assume that because several months have passed, grief should be fading in some orderly fashion. The grieving person may even begin wondering the same thing. Why am I still feeling this? But the question itself assumes that grief has an expiration date. Human attachment does not work that way. The importance of a relationship is not measured by how quickly we stop missing it, and adaptation does not mean erasure. For many people, grief changes over time rather than simply disappearing. The sharpness may soften. Life may regain texture. Attention slowly returns to things beyond the loss. There may be laughter again. New relationships, new routines, new meaning. But none of those things require pretending that what was lost no longer matters. The myth of the grief timeline. Many of us have heard about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. These ideas became enormously influential in popular culture, but one of the problems is the way they are sometimes interpreted. As though grief were a staircase, complete one stage, move to the next. Eventually reach acceptance. Finished. Real grief is rarely that orderly. People may experience some of these responses, all of them, none of them, or move repeatedly between different emotions. There may be acceptance on Monday and anger on Wednesday, peace in the morning and longing that evening. A person can understand what happened and still desperately wish it had not happened. Those experiences are not contradictions, they are part of being human. Grief is less like climbing a staircase and more like learning to live in unfamiliar territory. At first, almost everything feels unfamiliar. Eventually you begin recognizing the landscape, but occasionally you still turn a corner and discover something you were not prepared to see. Grief also lives in the body. We often speak about grief as though it happens entirely inside the mind. But people frequently experience it physically as well. Sleep may change, appetite may change, energy may disappear. Concentration can become difficult. The body may feel heavy or restless, and ordinary tasks can require unusual effort. This should not surprise us. Profound loss is also a profound stressor. Mind and body are not separate machines operating independently of one another. What affects one can influence the other. Sometimes simply understanding this can remove an unnecessary burden. A grieving person may think, what is wrong with me, when a more compassionate question might be, what has happened to me? Those are very different questions. The first assumes defect. The second acknowledges experience. There is no competition in grief. Another mistake we make is comparing losses. Someone may say, I shouldn't feel this bad. Other people have lost much more, but pain is not a competition. Someone else's tragedy does not make your loss meaningless, nor does your pain diminish theirs. What matters psychologically is not simply the category of loss. It is what that loss represented in your life. The person, the relationship, the possibility, the identity, the sense of safety, the imagined future. That is why two people can experience apparently similar losses very differently, and why two members of the same family can grieve the same person in completely different ways. They did not lose the same relationship. Each lost the relationship that existed between them and that person. That relationship was unique, so their grief will be unique as well. Grief is not proof that something has gone wrong. This may be the most important idea in this first episode. We live in a culture that often treats painful emotions as problems requiring immediate correction. We want techniques, solutions, closure. We ask, how do I get rid of this feeling? But grief is not necessarily an emotional malfunction. Often, it is the natural consequence of attachment. We grieve because something mattered, because someone became woven into our routines, memories, expectations, and identity, because there was love, or hope, or meaning. Sometimes grief even exists because there were things left unresolved, things we wish we had said, things we wish we had done differently, questions that will never receive answers. Grief tells us that the loss has significance, and perhaps the goal is not always to defeat grief. Perhaps, gradually, the task becomes learning how to carry what the loss means, without allowing the loss to become the entirety of life. There is an important difference between those two things. What changes with time healing does happen. But healing is an imperfect word, because it can make us imagine returning to exactly who we were before. Sometimes we don't. Some experiences change us. The person who eventually emerges may carry greater vulnerability, but perhaps also greater compassion, a different understanding of time, a deeper awareness of what matters, an appreciation for ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant. None of this means that loss happens for a reason. We do not need to romanticize suffering to acknowledge that human beings can develop meaning after it. And meaning does not cancel pain. Both can exist. We can miss someone and still enjoy life. We can carry sadness and experience gratitude. We can remember what ended while participating fully in what remains. Grief can hold contradictions because human beings hold contradictions, and then comes the wave. Just when someone begins believing they are doing better, something happens. A song starts playing. A birthday arrives. A familiar scent appears. Someone tells an old story. You open a drawer. You drive past a certain street. And suddenly the distance between yesterday and 10 years ago disappears. The grief returns with astonishing force. People sometimes interpret these moments as setbacks. They may think, I thought I was past this. But what if grief does not return? Because you have gone backward. What if memory simply opened a door? And what if these unexpected waves are part of the way attachment continues to live inside us? That is where we will go next. In episode 2 of The Psychology of Grief, we will explore why grief comes in waves, why memories and triggers can suddenly bring loss back into the present, why healing is rarely linear, and why an unexpected moment of sadness does not mean that all your progress has disappeared, because grief does not follow a straight road. And understanding that may be one of the most compassionate things we can learn about ourselves. If this exploration helped you understand grief a little differently, subscribe to Wellnesshubnest and join us for the rest of this series. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, perhaps take a quiet moment to remember what their presence meant. Some people leave our lives, but that does not mean they leave no trace. Sometimes the trace they leave becomes part of who we are.